The desert evening settled slow, the horizon smudged with gold and rust, as Clara Jennings flipped the last chair onto a table inside her weathered roadhouse. The air still hummed faintly with laughter and old songs, ghosts of a dozen nights that had ended the same way. She pressed her palms against the scarred wooden bar, feeling the heat that lingered from the day. Out beyond the glass, the sky bruised purple and the cicadas began their chorus. She thought about locking the door early, but loneliness always seemed to ask for one more drink. The jukebox clicked, the final tune drifting through the empty room, a steel guitar sighing out some half-forgotten ballad about time and love gone missing. Clara poured herself the last inch of rye from a bottle she'd sworn she'd finish weeks ago. It went down sharp, the kind of burn that reminded her she was still here, still alive in a world that didn't seem to notice much anymore. Her reflection in the back mirror caught her off guard, tired eyes, silver threading her hair, a woman still standing when most would have sat down long ago. The door creaked open with the kind of hesitation that made her glance up. He stepped in like a shadow drawn by the light, boots dusty, hat tilted low, the smell of rain and horse clinging to him. He was young, but not soft. The kind of young that had already learned what loss felt like. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, voice steady, polite. "Didn't mean to intrude so late." His words had that western drawl that made time feel slower somehow, more deliberate. "You already did," she said, a smile tugging at one corner of her mouth. "But since you're here, might as well sit. Last calls for the living." She motioned to a stool near the end of the bar. He took it, setting his hat down carefully, eyes adjusting to the dim light. "Whiskey, neat," he said, and when she poured it, their hands brushed, a quick, accidental touch that carried more warmth than the drink itself. Something old in her chest shifted. Something she hadn't let move in years. He introduced himself as Cole Tanner, said he'd been working the rodeo circuit up north, drifting south for a spell until the next thing came along. "You own this place?" he asked, glancing around at the worn floorboards and faded photos on the wall, cowboys, old dance nights, a younger Clara smiling beside a man who wasn't there anymore. She nodded. 30 years. Was my husband's before he passed. I just kept it going. Habit, I guess." She said it like it was nothing, but it hung between them like the smoke curling off his drink. Cole took a slow sip, eyes thoughtful. "Habit's not the worst thing," he said softly. "Means you still care about something." His voice had a weight to it, the kind that came from more than miles. Clara leaned back, folding her arms. "You talk like someone twice your age." He grinned faintly. "Maybe I feel that way some days." Outside, the wind picked up, brushing dust against the windows. The neon sign buzzed, throwing its pale blue light over his face. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like closing up. She poured him another, then one for herself. "Peace," he said when she asked what brought him here. "Looking for a quiet place to breathe a while." She laughed, low and dry. "You'll have better luck finding gold out here." But her voice softened. "Still, you came to the right kind of quiet. The kind that don't ask questions." He met her eyes then, steady, unguarded. It was a look she remembered from years ago, the way men looked when they still believed in something, even if they couldn't name it. They talked about small things. The dust storms that rolled in come spring, the way the coyotes sang at night, how the desert always seemed to keep its secrets. Cole spoke about his father's ranch, the one he lost after the droughts. Clara told him about her husband, about the years when the bar was full every night, when laughter used to drown out the jukebox. As the night deepened, their words grew slower, less about facts and more about the ache behind them. She caught herself listening in ways she hadn't in years, not just hearing, but feeling. At some point, the storm began, a low rumble first, then rain slapping against the tin roof. The sound filled the space between them, made the silence easier. Cole stood and went to the window, peering out at the downpour. "Guess the desert decided it was time," he said. "Road's a river by now." She nodded toward the back. "There's a cot, towels too, if you don't mind, ones that seen better days." He hesitated, the kind of pause that wasn't about manners, but pride. "You sure?" he asked. "Storm like that," she said, "you'd be foolish to leave." He smiled, small and grateful. "Yes, ma'am." She frowned. "Don't call me that, makes me sound older than I feel." He chuckled, the sound warm and disarming. "What should I call you then?" She thought for a moment. "Clara'll do." The way he said her name after that felt strange, too gentle, too real. As the thunder rolled outside, She poured one last round, the bottle nearly empty now. They drank to nothing in particular, to the night, to storms, to whatever it was that made strangers feel less like strangers. When she finally leaned back against the bar, staring at the flickering light from the jukebox, she felt the years she'd built around herself start to crack. He caught her looking and didn't look away. The quiet between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. "You ever think about leaving this place?" he asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but I wouldn't know where to go. This old bar's got its hooks in me." He nodded. "Some things do." She smiled faintly. "You talk like you've been running from something." "Maybe I have," he said. "Maybe we both have." The rain eased to a whisper, the desert sighing as if it had spent itself. She stood, stretching, her bones aching but her spirit lighter somehow. "You'll find the cotton back," she said, voice quiet. "Don't mind the noise. Roof leaks near the corner." He nodded, hat in hand, and for a moment she thought he might say something that would break whatever fragile peace they'd found. But he didn't, just smiled. "Good night, Clara." She watched him disappear through the doorway, the sound of his boots fading down the hall. When she turned off the lights, the room went soft and still. Outside, the desert glistened under the dim moonlight, every puddle catching pieces of the stars. She whispered to no one, "I'm too old for this," but even as she said it, she couldn't help the small, quiet smile that followed. Somewhere in the back room, the young cowboy settled in, and the roadhouse, for the first time in years, didn't feel quite so empty. The storm came in waves that night, a restless animal pacing across the roof. The thunder rolled far and low, like it didn't want to leave. Clara sat by the small fire in the corner stove, listening to the rain thrum against the windows. The smell of wet earth drifted through the cracks in the door, mixing with the whiskey that lingered in the air. She told herself she was staying up to make sure the place didn't flood, but that wasn't the truth. She was listening for footsteps, for the sound of him moving in the back room. Cole had been quiet since he disappeared down the hall, polite enough not to intrude, respectful enough not to ask for more than shelter. But his presence filled the building anyway, like a song that hummed underneath every sound. She tried to busy her hands, wiping glasses, straightening stools, but the silence made her aware of every creak in the floor, every breath she took. She wasn't used to feeling nervous in her own place. It was strange, like the air had changed and she didn't know how to breathe it yet. Outside, lightning flared, bright enough to turn the windows silver. Clara flinched, then laughed at herself. "You're too old for this," she muttered. But her voice didn't sound convinced. She poured another inch of whiskey, then decided against it. Somewhere in the back, she heard movement, footsteps, slow and careful. When Cole appeared in the doorway, the lamplight caught his face, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the years between them meant nothing at all. He looked uncertain, almost shy. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Didn't mean to bother you." She gestured to the stool by the stove. "You're not bothering me. Storm like this, no one sleeps easy." He sat down, hands clasped around the mug she handed him. Steam curled up from the coffee, carrying the faint scent of burnt beans. "You make a habit of taking in strays?" he asked after a moment. She smiled. "Only the quiet ones." He chuckled softly, and the sound warmed the space more than the fire. They sat in silence for a while, the rain filling the gaps words might have ruined. After a long pause, he spoke again. "You ever think about leaving? Starting fresh somewhere else?" She stared into the fire. "Sometimes. But I got too many ghosts here. Too much holding me still." Cole nodded, thoughtful. "My dad used to say the same thing. Said the land remembers everything, who worked it, who left it behind." She glanced at him, saw something tender flicker behind his eyes. "He was right," she said. "Places remember. So do people." For a moment, they both seemed caught in that thought, suspended between what was and what could have been. The storm hit harder, rain hammering the tin roof. The lights flickered, then steadied again. Clara rose to check the door, tugging at the latch to make sure it held. When she turned, Cole was watching her, really watching her, like he was memorizing the way she moved, the way the lamplight brushed the silver in her hair. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said softly, almost teasing, but her voice betrayed her. "Like what?" he asked, half smiling. She shook her head. "Like you're trying to make sense of something you shouldn't." He stood, setting his mug aside. "Maybe I'm not trying to make sense of it." His voice was low, quiet enough that the rain almost drowned it out. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. She wanted to step back, to say something clever, something safe, but she didn't. She just stood there, the space between them thinning like the storm outside. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her. He just waited, like a man who'd learned that patience was its own kind of courage. It was that restraint, more than anything, that made her breath catch. A gust of wind rattled the windows, breaking the moment. She turned away first, hiding the tremor in her voice. "There's blankets in the cupboard by the cot," she said. "You'll catch cold otherwise." He hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Clara." Her name sounded different when he said it, softer, unfinished. She listened to his footsteps fade again, then stood alone by the fire, the flames shifting gold and orange across her face. She let out a long, uneven breath, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't felt this alive, and this uncertain, in years. Later, when she finally lay down on the small sofa in her office, she could still hear the rain and the occasional creak of floorboards from the back room. Each sound reminded her that she wasn't alone, and that unsettled her more than solitude ever had. Sleep came slow, drifting between memory and storm. She dreamed of laughter, of music, of a time when she'd still believed her life had chapters left to write. Somewhere in the dream, a voice said her name again, soft as the wind. When she woke, dawn was still far off. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside gleamed, washed clean and bright. Clara rose early, made coffee, and opened the back door to the smell of wet sage and earth. Cole was already awake, standing by the fence line, his silhouette framed against the pale sky. He turned when he heard her, smiling like the day itself had given him permission to. She lifted her mug in silent greeting. For a moment, she thought how strange it was, that a single night could feel like a beginning. Then she whispered to herself, "I'm too old for this." But even as she said it, she didn't believe it anymore. The sun rose slow over the desert, the kind of morning that made every color softer. Gold light spilled through the roadhouse windows, turning the dust in the air into glitter. Clara stood behind the bar, pouring coffee, watching the steam rise in lazy curls. The storm had passed, but it had left something behind, a quietness that didn't feel empty. She could still hear the echo of rain on the roof, the sound of his voice in the dark. She didn't know what the day would bring, but for the first time in years, that thought didn't scare her. Cole came in from outside, hat in hand, hair damp from the morning dew. His boots left faint prints on the wooden floor, and the smell of fresh air followed him like a promise. "Morning," he said, voice light. "Didn't mean to wake you." She smiled. "Didn't sleep much anyway." He nodded toward the horizon. Storm cleared fast, skies clear for miles. He looked around, almost reluctant. "Place feels different this morning." She met his eyes over the rim of her mug. "Maybe it's just us that feels different." Neither of them argued. He helped her open the shutters, light spilling in with the warmth of early sun. They moved quietly, almost in rhythm, as though they'd done it together for years. She noticed the way he handled things carefully, the broom, the chairs, the mugs, as though he respected the history in each one. It reminded her of her late husband, how he'd once treated this bar like a living thing. The thought should have hurt, but it didn't. It just made her aware that life kept surprising her, even when she thought it had stopped trying. When the chores were done, they sat on the porch steps, sipping coffee. The desert stretched endless before them, glimmering under the new light. "I should get moving soon," he said quietly. "Fence work up north won't mend itself." She nodded, the words catching in her throat. "Guess I knew you would." He smiled a little. "You make it sound like a goodbye." She tried to laugh. "Ain't that what it is?" He tilted his head. "Only if you want it to be." She looked away, her heart unsteady in her chest. They fell into silence again, the kind that didn't need fixing. The wind carried the smell of mesquite and wet dirt, the sound of distant birds. Cole glanced at her, studying the lines of her face, the strength that hadn't faded with age. "You ever think maybe you stayed too long out here?" he asked gently. She considered it. "Maybe, but this land's been my home longer than anything else. Hard to walk away from what built you." He nodded. "Sometimes you don't have to walk away. Sometimes you just need a reason to stay." His words lingered. She didn't answer, afraid she might say something she couldn't take back. Instead, she stood, brushing off her jeans. "Breakfast's on," she said, walking inside. He followed, the sound of his boots grounding her thoughts. They cooked together, eggs, bacon, toast, moving with the easy rhythm of two people who'd found comfort in the same silence. Every now and then, their hands brushed, and neither of them pretended it didn't happen. When they sat down to eat, the morning light painted them in gold, the kind of moment that felt borrowed from another lifetime. After the dishes were done, Cole fetched his gear from the cot. The sight of his saddle made her chest tighten. "Guess this is where the road splits," she said, trying to keep her voice even. He fastened the straps, glancing up at her. "Maybe. Or maybe it just bends a little before it circles back." She gave him a look that was half disbelief, half hope. "Don't make promises you can't keep." He shook his head. "Wasn't a promise, just the truth." For a long second, neither of them moved. The air between them felt thick with everything unspoken. He reached for her hand, rough palm meeting hers, and the simple warmth of it undid her. "You've got a good heart, Clara," he said. "You just forgot how to let it breathe." Her throat tightened. "Maybe I did." She squeezed his hand once before letting go. "You be careful out there, Cole Tanner." He nodded. "You too." Then he tipped his hat, stepped out into the sunlight, and mounted his horse. She watched him ride off across the open plain, the dust rising behind him like a memory she wasn't ready to lose. When he disappeared over the ridge, the silence returned, but it felt different now. Not lonely, just waiting. Clara walked back inside, the bar glowing softly in the morning light. She ran her hand along the counter, the same wood her husband had built, the same space where a stranger had made her remember what it meant to feel alive. She poured herself a small cup of coffee, raised it toward the empty doorway, and smiled. "You'll be back," she whispered. "Storms always leave something behind." The jukebox clicked, unprompted, playing a slow tune from the past. The day stretched on, steady and sunlit. Customers drifted in, stories were told, laughter found its way into corners that hadn't heard it in months. But even in the noise, she caught herself glancing toward the horizon, half expecting a silhouette against the sky. Maybe he'd return next week. Maybe he wouldn't. It didn't matter. Something in her had already shifted. When the sun began to sink, she stood at the doorway, the light touching her face like a benediction. "I'm too old for this," she whispered again, smiling to herself. But the smile told the real truth, she wasn't.